Hey everyone, welcome to Neighbor Science, the only podcast about political economy and anime. We are here to tell everyone that replies to Bernie Sanders that taxes don't fund spending, and to determine whether the anime with the demon-slaying demon dog is better than the anime with the demon-slaying demon sister.
Crucial.
Today we're talking about a little debate that has flared up on the left, starting with an article from Doug Henwood, who... I don't have anything in the notes about this, but I read some stuff and some of the responses to it that, the critique that he writes of MMT is extremely long and seemingly detailed. So it seems pretty convincing that he's coming from a place of good faith. But it turns out he's kind of like the equivalent of like socially liberal, fiscally conservative, but for socialists.
Right. Okay, interesting.
So... he's like a tax and spend liberal, but with class politics.
With class politics. Okay, yeah. Okay. Interesting.
So,
sort of, okay.
Like, I guess the class he cares about is the middle class or something like I don't know what the fuck it is. But, so I don't know a whole ton about this guy, but we'll get into it. So, we all know about MMT by now, probably. If you don't, just keep listening and you'll pick up what it is, because we're talking about a debate about it. So the first question that anyone should have is, why do we care about MMT? So MMT is a modern evolution of chartalism, which is a theory of currency that centers the state as the issuer of currency to direct human activity, rather than I can't remember the name of the theory, the cute story of how you and your neighbor are swapping potatoes for eggs, but your other neighbor won't sell you any of his weed because he thinks potato salad is only good at barbecues. So like you and your boy thought up this sick idea where you make discs out of gold that everyone will want because they look dope as fuck and they're hella exclusive, which is like so genius that it changed history, dog. And now you're smoking top shelf kush and top shelf pussy. Metalism. That's what it's called.
Yeah, metalism.
So anyway, based on this conception of the origin of money, people who buy into metalism conclude that governments have to collect money through taxation prior to spending it, because they have to raise revenue to spend it, just like any person does.
Right.
And this imagined problem then leads politicians to respond to every public spending proposal with, how do you pay for it?
Right.
And it limits possible government expenditures to what it can collect in taxes. So MMT reasserts the chartalist understanding of money, which is that states create currency, which they create a money which they issue as currency to start or stop human activity, and just to differentiate, currency is the actual like token that you spend, and money is the denomination. Yeah. So $1 is a money, and a dollar bill is a currency.
Exactly. Idea versus material, or system versus material.
Yeah. And so they maintain the desirability of the currency through taxation and or through fiat, as in like just force of law. With physical force ultimately serving as the backbone to either.
Which fits really well with international relations theory about like that side of political science, because it's much less kind of like fretful about like a lot of the kind of more like
maintaining the Newtonian model of the economy.
Exactly. Like in IR, it's much more common to just be like, no, if you have an army, you're good to go. Like,
we don't care about prestige in the economics field, so this is what really happens.
You're like, this is how this shit works, and let's talk about it.
And so MMT updates the chartalist theory with theories of central banking, how it works, like lots of details on the different operations that central banks can and actually do. Central banks, I think, are probably the most distinguishing feature of capitalist states from prior states. I would say that the point at which capitalism really started to dominate the planet was the creation of the Bank of England.
Pretty much.
Which, as we've mentioned on a previous episode, I'm pretty sure
I think it was the VOC or one of the other ones.
The Bank of England was basically created to finance the world-class navy that the British wanted to create. And I think we should do an episode on that, because
specifically on the Bank of England.
Yeah, because it's kind of hard to understand how it works, because supposedly it was created through the capital of people that initially lent the pound sterling to its creation, rather than the government just saying like, yeah, now the Bank of England exists and here's how much money it has.
Right.
There's like actually people who had like pound sterling, that supposedly like gave it the capital that it needed to start. But that could have been like there were capital requirements that they had in place in law, or like they imagined that that's how it was supposed to work. Because like even if something works a certain way, if the people that are operating it don't believe that it works that way, then they still do their actions based on that, even if that's not how it really works in reality.
Right. Yeah. Well, that's the tricky thing about fiat is like you get into like constructivism or other similar sorts of things in cultural analysis and political analysis, and like you begin to understand, if you didn't already suspect, or understand that like, everything social is political and everything social and political is like kind of made up. Yeah. Beyond that kind of material, analysis and historical materialism that like we love so much on the left. Yeah. Right. Anything beyond that is that sort of ideological, that kind of superstructural or whatever else you want to call it. Like, and that includes, this is kind of what we're talking about. That's what MMT gets at, is like that includes the money and currency systems of the world. And capitalism rests much of its power on that, and implicitly, therefore, on state and military power. Right. Right. So then the central bank and everything like that, even if the people, like you said, I think this is kind of what you're getting at, even if the people who are operating it, like pulling the levers and pushing the buttons, don't actually themselves believe that works that way, or that like it's Milton a valid Friedman. Way of thinking. Yeah, exactly. Doesn't fucking matter because there's guns somewhere. Yeah. And so MMT asserts that central banks are a tool of the government rather than a totally independent entity that the government would have to repay as if we would repay a bank that gives us a mortgage or something like that. Right. And they also have another assertion, which I don't know if I agree with. I don't know enough to formulate a disagreement to it. But they also assert that their theory does not apply at all to states that have a reserve-backed currency like the gold, with the gold standard. Interesting. So I don't know if I buy into that, because there's still seigniorage on the money that they create, even if it's like a gold-based currency. And like, even if you say like, oh yeah, this note is good for like this amount of gold, like you don't necessarily have to have that amount of gold, because how many fucking people are going to turn in their dollar bills for gold? Right. Yeah. Especially like, have you ever seen how like the size of a $50 gold coin? It's like smaller than it's like a quarter of the size of a dime. It's like a button. Yeah, it's tiny. Like a tiny button. So how much fucking gold could a dollar be worth? Right. And that even addresses, you get 1 grain. Right. That even touches on like the fluidity of the value of like currency notes and stuff versus what it's backed by, because like, again, like in capitalism, or really even in not capitalist systems, like when we talked in the Kokodaka episode about the monies that they use there, like the denominations and the notes that are attached to the denominations like really are very fluid and like context based, and like your circumstances changed, and this is where you get the phrase not for love or money, right, where like if shit is bad, like there's no fucking way out of it, like even if you have like $1,000 fucking dollars, which might have yesterday bought you a month of rent here, or 500 loaves of bread or whatever, like then tomorrow that can't even get you a fucking passage out of the country. You're right, things like that. So like you have to kind of remember that there's like there's the money, there's the currency, and there's what it's backed by technically, whether it's like a metal or even if you say military power. Even if you say that something backs the currency, like okay, so you get gold from your dollars. All right, what do you do with that? Right. Yeah. Like for the ancient world, nobody has scales precise enough to like measure gold in light enough amounts for you to do any sort of daily transactions. Yep. And then like, what are you gonna do? Fucking sell it for what? Exactly. And actually, speaking of like ancient scales and like the difficulty of measuring like metal backing and like the quality of the metal you're using to measure
treasure or whatever the fuck you want to call it, currency, etc. That's where the term eureka comes from. People don't use it much, but eureka came from, I believe it was Archimedes, who realized that you could measure.
Yeah, white people invented density.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. Measure density by
I'm going to dispute that history right now, but
yeah.
I don't know the correct or the if that's correct or not or what. But
Yeah, you can measure density because it's the volume versus the the weight, right?
Mass over volume. Yeah.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah. So supposedly
mass.
he was getting in the bath and he noticed that the water rises because I displace it because I have mass.
Yep. And so
he invented units of measurement,
pure gold versus
and mathematics
alloy, exactly right. And so so that's like a whole
and prevented currencies from being debased forever.
Right.
But it never happened after that.
Right. But what's funny is this actually is even backing up to the idea of backing a currency or a money, whatever. With a metal, typically, or with some other precious resource, that is itself a somewhat spurious way of thinking, because a lot of the people who are very insistent on metalism and stuff, the argument seems to be but that's real, and you're
yeah,
nothing's real.
Yeah,
nothing's real. Right? We just told you it's all constructed.
Art is a lie. Nothing is real.
Exactly. Bo Burnham said it best. And so
what's funny though? There's some of those guys that are also really into tally sticks. Do you know about tally sticks?
No, what?
So tally sticks are a system of currency in England. I don't even know if it was really currency because it was more of a measure of debt.
It's like an IOU thing.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
so Catalonia would have loved
this. You take this special stick and then you notch it with the amount that you owe the person, and then you split it, and then each person takes half of it.
Oh, okay.
And then during the reckoning, you put them back together or something like that. So it's
that way.
That's not real. It's just a fucking stick. What are you talking about?
I think it's in a way. It's a kind of a rustic way to have. It's basically ledger based accounting, right? You're my hash matches your hash, and we're good to go. And if I try to put one on mine that you owe me that, then I'll obviously be found out, right? So it's weird,
but it's archaic, still in a way it's a bearer note.
It's archaic crypto
because all you need to have is the half of the stick to have the claim on the debt,
right? Exactly. So it's still that is more of an IOU note, right? That's quote unquote primitively hashed,
yes.
So it's interesting. Whereas if you've got something that's demonstrably a state currency note, and they can't prove that it's not real, that it's not authorized, right? And key into that term, authorized,
right?
Authority, right?
It's a good way to put it.
Yeah, it's you have to think about if you think about everything that's quote unquote authorized, whether it's a currency note or a publication of other kinds, and for that matter, things like copyright, and that matter, things like patents. It's all the same class of thing in terms of its relation to the state, right? And that's
what we should watch and talk about on the podcast. To Live and Die in L.A.
I haven't heard of that actually.
Oh, it's like an '80s movie about the Secret Service chasing counterfeiters.
Oh, interesting. Okay,
it's very dark. My dad showed it to me one time, and I was like, "This is making me too depressed." So I couldn't pay attention to it. But this is when I was probably 13.
Yeah.
So I probably appreciate it more now.
Like the movie Catch Me If You Can.
Oh, that movie fucking rocks.
Right,
dude.
and you're
so good.
It's depressing.
That was one of
my
favorite movies.
But then you kind of get away with it.
Yeah,
because he kind of sells out. But you're well, you
I was sad when he got caught and forced by the FBI to work for them.
Right.
I bet there was a lot of people that were like, yes, now he's working for the good guys.
Right, yeah. It's like when
fuck you.
When the CIA catches hackers and shit, and you're like, damn it, fuck. Yeah.
Frank Abagnale did nothing wrong.
Right. So
he's gonna get milkshake ducked after this. All right, so we gotta get in this episode. We got a lot of stuff to cover.
There's a ton of material.
All right, so Doug Henwood's article is called "MMT Isn't Helping." No, I'm just deleting our quotes. Jeez,
I fat fingered.
Fine, I'm kidding. All right, so I'm just gonna jump right in, and this is kind of in media res. So, while adherents strenuously profess that MMT is subtler and more complex than this, its main selling point is that governments need not tax or borrow in order to spend. They can just create money out of thin air. A few computer keystrokes and everyone gets health insurance, student debt disappears, and we can save the climate too, without all that messy class conflict. So, kind of like, at first I was like, yeah, I guess, but then I was like, well, that's kind of a straw man, because they're just saying that's how you fund it.
I was just going to say that's a bit of a straw man.
There's still a struggle to get to the point where you can even do that.
Yeah. I don't know, this seems petty.
Yeah. So he continues, Warren Mosler, who runs a hedge fund, holds forth on MMT and writes big checks in support of the cause. Mosler, whom Galbraith has described as a national treasure, isn't afflicted with false modesty. He calls his blog The Center of the Universe, and on it quotes a description of his very slender book, Soft Currency Economics, as the most important book ever written. He lives in the U.S. Virgin Islands because it is a tax shelter with nice weather, a point worth keeping in mind when we look more closely at MMTers' thoughts on taxation. So, like, as soon as I got to this point, first I'll say I think it's clear that proponents of a political theory, if allowed to have public influence, will exert an influence that goes beyond whatever, like, limited part of their beliefs that I or other critics personally accept. So, like, even if all we say is, like, oh, I like your ideas on MMT, if they are put into a position of influence, their other ideas may get into the political movement and influence it.
Right. There's a kind of stickiness with, like, your platform versus your other views, I guess. Yeah. That can, like, pull other shit in that isn't really necessarily attached.
Right.
Or is that attached, it's attached in your mind, but other people might not even agree.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
But I'm pretty sure I already know what the author is getting at with this, which is basically that MMT will not further class struggle because its proponents will push back against taxation as a policy. But I also think that single-payer systems and job guarantees do far more to further the working class than almost any amount of taxation would. And sorry, one sec. I'm just making a... Yep. And I also don't think class struggle is inherently better depending on if there's, like, more resistance to it. What matters is the outcome for the class you're fighting for.
Yes.
So, like, the upper class would love it if we would just all stop fighting and asking for stuff and just let them enslave us in peace.
Right.
So if we can advance the interests of the working class with less resistance, I think that's better than having a lot of resistance. Like, last time we tried taxing the hell out of the rich, they invented libertarians.
Right, as we know them now. Yeah,
that's punishment enough, I think.
And that was the weird thing, is, like, that's, like, basically the whole Koch brothers project now, is that, like, they're like, they couldn't figure out, they, like, totally fumbled, like, electoralism, and they couldn't figure it out, which is hilarious.
Yeah.
Because it's so fucking easy.
Yeah. You just buy a bunch of candidates and then get them into office. What are you doing?
They're like, oh, wait. Oh, this is how we do it.
What if we fund this third party?
Right. Yeah,
That's a good idea.
Yeah.
So you had a comment on this, though.
Oh, yeah, and this is just, like, this isn't in contradiction. This was kind of like me just kind of, like, riffing on how this kind of hits that snag that people typically get to with, well, if we can introduce better things in government, better programs, better policies, reforms, right, then we'll have less resistance to gain ground, et cetera, et cetera. We'll gain ground, and then we'll have built some momentum, and we'll gain more ground. And I'm sympathetic to that, right? Like, and I would like to see that happen, and I think that, like, we always have to be fighting for that, regardless of our other ideas.
Yeah.
But it's like such a double-edged sword, as we know, and this is just, like, one of those classic leftist arguments, right? Where, like, we're all like, about reformism, it's better or worse,
Yeah.
and then people get in a big fucking bar fight about it and to me, like, I'm a maximalist when it comes to strategy. Just, like, fucking run everything, right? Do this and do your other shit, right? Do this and your wobblies and your fucking, tanky shit and whatever you've got in your pockets, pull it out and use it, right?
Yeah.
So, especially, like, because we don't just have a diversity of tactics that could possibly work together, in my opinion, a lot, and a lot more than maybe we've done. But we also have an extreme diversity of people and talents, and experiences, and those contribute more personally to what we're trying to achieve, right? Because that, to me, is like the grit of the idea that we are the revolution. Is that, like, we are diverse and
everyone has a place.
Right? And, like, if you're a fucking tanky, like, as long as you're not, like, hosing
trying to
the
murder
wrong
me
people, exactly, then we're cool.
Yeah.
And everything else is just golden, and like we'll figure it out.
Yeah.
Right. And maybe we'll have a synthesis later that like works for everybody.
Yeah.
Right.
Even if I come to own a business, I promise that I'm a communist still.
Right. We're
not trying to join the upper class.
This is subversive business owning as opposed to and I know that.
And we'll actually get into that a little bit later.
Faces for that maybe, but whatever.
Yeah.
So that was just kind of like that was my comment.
Okay.
And the intent there.
And so of course, even with this whole thing that he's gonna get on about with MMT people resisting taxes, the people that are the person that's most likely to put them into any sort of power, which is Bernie Sanders, has a bunch of large redistributive taxes that he's planning to levy on the rich.
Right.
So it's not like they're like this poison pill where it's like, oh, Bernie Sanders has Stephanie Kelton as his like economic advisor, so she's going to push back against these taxes. It's like, well, no, he already wants to do that though, and he's already been saying that. So pretty sure that he's going to do it if he can,
And if we think about this might be getting ahead of your notes because I haven't read every fucking thing that you wrote, which is like a lot, but appropriate because it's a lot of stuff to cover. But when in the MMT terms, like taxes, money destruction, right? And so, in a sense, in a pool where it's not resources so much that are scarce, but the currency notes or currency value that is scarce because of false scarcity and because they're hoarding, then, like put in MMT terms, the destruction of rich people's money is advantageous because it weakens their hoarding and it weakens everything else that they've built, right?
Yeah.
So even if, like, we don't necessarily spend the tax in optimal ways, we've still destroyed their money a little bit, right? And so it's like that is a weapon, and even if you're just like pointing in a dark room and spraying with that weapon, you're going to hit something. Right? So that's kind of how I want to think about that in MMT terms.
Yeah. And I think another thing, I'm pretty sure I've mentioned it before, like if we issue just like insane amounts of money and basically helicopter drop it to everyone, like every poor person gets like $1 billion. Like if we make everyone a billionaire, then like the billionaires' wealth that they have squirreled away in tax shelters is like not worth nearly as much.
They'll be shitting their pants. Yeah, it'd be hilarious. Yeah. So it's like either or both ways would be great. Yeah. And this is like this reminds me of our Yang Bucks episode with Tien and Jay, where it's like I think that he's kind of trying to do something like that for the working class and poor and everything, and just general people. The problem is that he's not, as far as I'm aware, he's not targeting the people who need that money. He's just gonna spray it to everybody. And that doesn't really help. Right. So it's like if Yang Bucks was like everybody who makes under $100,000, which is most Americans, then that'd be fine. I would be into that. Right. Because it would balance that shit out a little bit. But the problem is that it's class unconscious, if you will, right? It's class blind. So go on. Sorry.
So the author continues, as Ray put it, he's talking about Randall Ray here, who's one of the top MMT advocates and economists. Ray says the government does not need the public's money in order to spend. Rather, the public needs the government's money in order to pay taxes. Once this is understood, it becomes clear that neither taxes nor government bonds finance government spending. I should work on an impersonation of him because he has a very distinct voice and manner of speaking. But anyway,
YouTube channel, just impressions of economists.
And so Henwood continues, you might be wondering where income earned on the job fits into all this. But the world of production doesn't play a large role in the theory. So I don't think the author has read Debt by David Graeber and doesn't understand that the idea is that the process of issuing money and demanding taxes and creating proprietary institutions causes markets to emerge from government employees to taxpayers, which is what drives production for the state. And that's where it fits in.
And that's that's kind of where we had a bit of an exchange in the comments, and I said, and they're proxies and agents, and you're like, yeah, but like it's tiresome to like get into all the nuances of those relationships. And so
I'm including like government agencies and everything, and employees,
basically like any power center on down, and on out.
Anyone who the state gives money directly to.
Exactly. And this is where like I've mentioned this sort of idea or term before, but I do think that it kind of applies here as well, which is like the value chain or supply chain from the power center, like downward and outward, to people occupying all these other roles that they've basically kind of attached themselves to.
Okay.
Right? Through power relations, through hierarchy, and in the real world, in history, often it's because of colonial imperial enterprises.
Yep.
And other forms of domination, and just like traditional domination as well, like the patriarchy. And so like we're all born into those situations, which is important to remember, like that the state does as much to affect your family and your family's relationships as it does to affect like the quote unquote value of the dollar bill. Right? Like it's all part of the same complex.
Yes.
Yeah.
And by the way, as I'm reading this, I'm skipping over like huge sections because the article is seriously like probably like 20,000 words or some shit like that.
Yeah.
It's like crazy long. So I'm just highlighting parts that are kind of interesting or worthy of comment. So he continues here. Aside from Knapp and Rumi, who are they're two economists that are major influences on MMT. Aside from Knapp and Rumi, MMTers take...
it's Rummel, actually.
Oh, Rummel, yeah. Oh, sorry.
Rumi's the poet, Rummel's the economist.
Yeah, it's hard to see.
It's okay.
Kind of far away.
Yeah,
Rummel. MMTers take inspiration from the economist Abba Lerner, particularly in his 1943 paper Functional Finance and the Federal Debt, which is neither outlandish nor right-wing. So he was calling Knapp and Rummel right-wingers, kind of.
Gotcha.
Or one of them. I don't remember. It was written in the middle of World War II when fiscal prudence didn't merely take a back seat to the war effort. It wasn't even in the vehicle. Because of the war experience, all of the old rules of balanced budget fiscal orthodoxy seemed utterly antique, and the conviction grew that clever fiscal management could tame the business cycle and minimize unemployment.
Okay.
So, when I read this, I thought about like the difference between policy during and not during the war. So, like before and after the war versus during the war,
right?
Can be significantly explained by legitimacy.
Oh yeah.
So during World War II, the government had near unlimited legitimacy because of the global existential threat of the Axis powers.
They could tell you to do fucking anything.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, oh, the Nazis are coming.
Exactly.
Like, you going to worry about the fucking deficit, you dickhead?
Yeah, right. What, are you a fucking Nazi yourself? Are you not a patriot? Yeah.
So once the war was over, the legitimization for the extreme levels of government spending and taxation kind of instantly vaporized. And so in the post-war era, they drummed up the more distant and ideologically distinct threat of the Soviets to form the core of legitimacy for most government spending at that point, which was mostly on like secret military projects, giving black people syphilis, dosing people with LSD to mind control them, covering up aliens, that kind of thing. Killing millions of Vietnamese people to crush communism,
quote unquote,
that sort of thing. And as the threat of the Soviets was reduced, as the Soviet Union drifted towards collapse, I don't even know if collapse is the right word, but anyway, neoliberalism emerged and legitimized the state on the basis of like business and their leaders and like what they did, like their merits and all that shit. And that's what we have today. Is everything is based on the merits of businessmen, and so the state is legitimate only insofar as like it's supported by big business.
Right. Yeah.
Which we see like heavily now because anytime you say like, oh, we need to do this, it's like, oh, well, then all the businessmen are going to leave. And then what do you got? Like, well, we still have all the fucking guns and planes and tanks and mech suits and all that shit. So, you know.
Exactly.
and now we have another global existential threat looming over our heads. And that will form the basis of infinite legitimacy for the state to issue as much money as it wants. So anyone who says, how are we going to pay for the Green New Deal should be kicked in the nuts repeatedly.
Yep.
And we know they have nuts because they're definitely a guy.
Pretty much, right? Right. Yeah, it's interesting because like I wanted to like touch on two things, which is like one, as you said, once the war was over, the legitimacy vanished, or just kind of like dried up, basically. And you know, of course, most or all of our listeners are probably some stripe of anarchist or whatever.
Yeah.
Anti-state something, anti-cap definitely. But like that is a great example of why wars are so popular with these capitalist powers in particular, because of the relationship of conflict creating legitimacy so that they can manipulate money pretty much like ad hoc by fiat really in your face, right? It gives them so much liberty to do so, whereas most of the time it's a bit of a cloak and daggers situation. It's a bit of a charade, right?
Yeah.
And then also like, yeah, in terms of like the Soviet situation, the way I understand it is it wasn't, like you said, it was like, is it really a collapse? It sounded like, you know, it was like this, the Gorbachev era was coming out of like, they were experimenting with different things. They were trying to kind of open up like the different kind of cultural options, and then nationalism, which is always a bit of a threat to like socialism, basically. Like, I mean, you know, we're talking about like, you know, chauvinist nationalism, right?
Yeah.
You know, just kind of just like tore it apart from the inside because they allowed it to happen.
Yeah.
You know, and that's a big fucking conversation that we shouldn't have right now.
Yes.
Right. Yeah.
So Henwood continues, for one thing, it often takes time to understand what's going on in the economy, and it takes even more time to change policy. And sometimes, like in the 1970s, unemployment and inflation are both rising, and it's not obvious what policy should do in response. And so he's mentioning this in the context of like, I think it was, what was the guy's name? Lerner said like, oh yeah, like all you got to do is like if inflation is rising, then you raise taxes,
right?
And then if unemployment rises, then you lower taxes or something like that. And so he's saying like, oh, well, it's not that easy. Which okay, that's fair. Thing. That's true.
Yeah.
He says anyone who's watched Congress struggle with tax and spending policy has to wonder how anyone could believe that fiscal policy could be fine-tuned with the requisite speed and precision.
So that line right there is missing the fucking point of Congress, right?
Right.
Like Congress doesn't struggle with this shit the way they present it as a struggle. They don't give a fuck about us, right? Like 90% of them don't, right? 10% of them are just too like isolated and weak to do anything, or maybe even less than 10%. But like like they're not struggling to make things easier for us. That's not their effort at all. They're struggling to come up with a deal that works for all of them.
Yes.
And they are part of the elite, generally.
And gets them both reelected and a nice, cushy lobbying job when they leave office.
Exactly. Yeah. So, like, this fucking statement right here is not an insight at all. It's missing the fucking boat entirely. Right? Which is that Congress is a corrupt, bureaucratic cabal.
Yeah.
That just like switches out faces and names for just to please the people.
Yeah.
And create more illusion and like to create some like more kind of like experiment with different relationships basically, right? To like do one thing or another with business so that like the different, corporate interests can like jockey for different positions and like do new things financially, right? But like, tax and spending, they don't really give a fuck as long as they're making more and more and more money because money is power and just that's it. That's blanket,
Yes.
So that's just missing the entire point.
So later he starts talking about how MMTers overestimate how easy it is to manipulate interest rates as well, because if you don't make the interest rate on bonds high enough, then no one will buy them. Which, of course, we covered in a previous episode.
It actually doesn't matter.
Yeah, most buyers of government bonds are buying them by government fiat, and Japan has for years had negative yield bonds that are in high demand. So that's not really a good criticism. And
people will do what they believe is necessary or helpful, including like sabotaging their own wealth, if that's ideologically favorable to them, right?
Or if it's like literally legally required for them to do it.
Or if it's required, exactly, right, yeah. Like, I've had to fucking do it. You know?
I was thinking about this on the drive over here.
Mm-hmm.
I think like probably 99% of reactionary tendency on the left with regards to public policy comes from the idea that supply and demand governs
that it actually
economics.
Is what they say it
rather
is.
than bargaining power, which is what actually governs economics.
Yep, it's relationships.
Yeah. So like the whole idea is like, oh yeah, if you raise the interest rates too high, then the demand for bonds goes down, so their price has to go down.
Yeah.
Like, no, dude. It's all about power. It doesn't fucking matter what the interest rate is if you just mandate that they have to buy them.
Exactly.
So he says less privileged countries have to worry about foreign investors dumping their bonds and driving down the value of the currency. So capital flight is what he's talking about, which would jack up interest rates and inflation. Salvador Allende's government greatly increased spending and raised the incomes of the poorest in Chile in the early 1970s. That worked nicely for a while, but then inflation took off. Allende wasn't operating from the MMT playbook, merely resorting to policies pursued by many progressive governments facing political opposition and resource constraints. So I pulled up a graph of inflation during the Allende presidency. I see you have it up there too.
Yep.
So I guess I can link it in the show description. But basically, this is actually measuring
pretty clear.
This is actually measuring real wages. So it's inflation in a way, but it's tempered by the bargaining power of workers to get higher wages. So from the beginning of the graph, 1967, to about 1971, March 1971, which is a couple months into Allende's presidency, real wages are going way up. And then they start dropping slowly at first, and then they just start to plummet. And so they go from the index starts at 1970 at 100, and so at its peak it's at about 118, and then by the end of Allende's presidency it's down at like 32. So 32% of what they would have been in 1970. But then as soon as his presidency ends, which they have like an orange line to denote the end of his presidency, it immediately jumps back up to 72% within 1 quarter. Like 3 months. So like,
that's bonkers. What could have happened?
Yeah, like what conventional theory of inflation could possibly explain the shape of this graph? We're supposed to believe that real wages were plummeting for 3 straight quarters, and then magically rebounded the moment Pinochet replaced Allende, and that this was merely because of incorrect economic policy, because like too much money was chasing too few goods. Of course, that's how it always is. And even though Pinochet didn't start making changes to the economy until 1975, when he got help from the American fascist economists at the Chicago School. So like inflation plummeted back down and then stabilized. And then around 1975, it actually starts going down again. But if we base our understanding of inflation not on the amount of public spending versus the amount of goods that are in the economy whose real value the money is supposed to represent, but rather on the degree of control over industry by business and the extractive demands they make of everyone to use the industry that they control through power, this graph makes perfect sense. Businesses raise prices as a punitive measure for challenging their authority over industry by the socialist administration, exactly up until the point where Allende was ousted, and then they're like, oh, well, everything's fine now. Now we have a military dictator that's going to let us do whatever we want.
Yep. And that's the interesting thing it's when you look at it that way, it is so clear, that like prices really are just relational tools. And businesses, I mean, you've got to be a fucking moron if you don't believe that business owners
I would love to hear this guy
vindictive.
Try to explain this fucking graph, dude. For real, like. Go
like,
ahead.
Like there is so much entertainment media about like So you do like Wolf of Wall Street and like the Gordon Gekko movie and Wall Street, right? And like all these other fucking things, just like
Big
the less
Short.
famous one, Big Short.
Yeah.
And you see like those are just popular narratives about what's quote unquote really going on in Wall Street. And that's just Wall Street, right? And like business owners generally, and like so many of us have had fucking bosses and continue to have bosses, and those people in our lives, unfortunately, and the people in the fucking stories, as lionized or as kind of glamorized as they are vindictive, evil motherfuckers.
Yeah.
You know this, we all know this. It's like, it's so weird that people like walk around trying to deny it, but they are fucking evil assholes.
Yeah.
Of course they fucking increase prices to punish the government because they believe that they're at odds.
That's fucking happening now in the country with healthcare.
That's the fucking whole thing, right? And when you look at the, the discourse in like the states about like, oh well, the government never does a good job, and like, oh, we gotta get things away from the government. You're like, yeah, like they're saying this because they're greedy motherfuckers, and because they hate intervention in their ways of exploiting other people.
Yeah.
Right? And it seems like that should be clear, but there's just like disorganized thinking around this stuff.
Yeah.
So yeah,
I don't trust the government to ration healthcare in such a way that I will get the best healthcare while everyone else suffers and dies.
Right, exactly, right. Which is such a bizarre.
We let the government get involved. They're gonna stop that
Yeah.
from happening, and that's why it's bad.
Right, exactly. And it really just comes down to power and like prices are one of the things that businesses can use as a form of backlash and manipulation. So this to me is like a perfectly viable and reasonable explanation for what was going on there. It's not just a bunch of rational, just kind of like cool-headed,
rationally calculating magic machine.
Oh, me, I'm just a businessman. I'm just doing what's rational.
Just little invisible wires attached to every little part of the economy.
Right. Like
it's all tied together in a big Gordian knot.
Right.
And, no one can untangle it. It's impossible.
Business people are always bragging to each other about how they fucked over somebody.
You know what we can do, though? Use a guillotine to cut the knot.
Yes, we can use that.
Just detach it all from the fucking state.
Yes.
So, Henwood continues here.
Oh,
this is straight from the last paragraph.
Fucking God.
But such experiments rarely end well, and similar problems would face a poor country trying to stimulate its way to prosperity today, as we see in Venezuela now.
Just chewing noises.
So, the last thing I'm going to have from this article in here is maybe one of the strongest arguments that he makes, although I'm not knowledgeable enough to take on or like support or deny, is this. He says Congress can pass any budget it chooses, and our government already pays for everything by creating new money. Sorry, that's a quote. But the government doesn't do that. It only spends money gotten from tax revenues or bond sales. If you don't believe me, look at a daily treasury statement, a daily accounting of the federal government's income and outgo. It looks a lot like any normal financial statement, only with a lot more zeros. The Fed is forbidden by law to purchase bonds directly from the Treasury. The recent episode of quantitative easing designed to fight the Great Recession was a partial exception. The Fed did buy huge gobs of Treasury bonds in an effort to stimulate the economy. That program is now over, but even then, the Fed only bought existing securities from private holders. The government cannot spend via keystrokes money created out of thin air. So the last part is true. QE was the central bank doing what's called open market operations, where they buy a lot of existing Treasury bonds. Yeah. I don't know about that daily Treasury statement thing, because I looked at it and it's just a balance sheet. So like, it doesn't necessarily mean that like they're raising taxes and then spending it, and that's all they're able to do. It's
like he's not. So it's like he's not really like thinking about. This guy is fucking gullible as shit. Is basically what I'm reading.
Yeah.
Like it's like he's like, well, there's a treasury statement, and that's just like money in, money out, and that's that's his argument for the first half of the paragraph.
Right.
And you're like, okay, but again, money is a fucking construct.
Yes.
You can do fucking anything with it if you have enough power. Guess who has enough power? governments, especially the U.S. government. You know how many fucking nukes we have? They don't give a fuck.
Yeah.
Right? And after the recession, you know who went to jail? Basically nobody. At least for doing that shit.
People who tried to stay in their houses.
Tried to stay in their houses, yeah. And people who try to occupy fucking Zuccotti Park and shit. You know, like,
yeah.
What the fuck are you fucking talking about? Like, what? Okay.
He is right about another thing, though. The Fed cannot technically buy Treasury bonds directly from the Treasury.
Yeah.
And that is
that's a nice legal argument.
That is in the 1913 Federal Reserve Act.
Yeah.
That's why it can't do that. So the question is, like, do we need to change the law before we can fully do MMT shit or not? Either way, though, it's like, well, the outcome is the same. We want to get to a point where we can do this.
Well, exactly.
Yeah.
Like, it's bizarre to me. Like, this is just like he's digging in his heels and repeating, like, you know how when people don't have an argument and they just like, that's the way it is, that's the way it is, that's the way it is, and you're like,
I'm intimately familiar with this.
Yes. Yeah.
Talking about any of this shit.
We've all run into this bullshit. Exactly. Right. And so you're like, it's like if you're talking, let's say, to like a traditional husband, right?
Yeah.
In a fucking traditional family, and you're like, well, what if
you grow your turnips and then
right.
You pull the turnips out and then you have to give some to the Lord and
right. Exactly. Exactly.
Oh wait, where are we going with it? Oh,
that's where it starts, right? And you're like, I bet your wife, your trad wife, would love to be able to vote, and they're like, oh, she doesn't need to vote. I'll vote for her.
Yeah.
And you're like, but what if she had an opinion that was different from yours? And like, it doesn't matter. Like, I'm wise enough for the whole household. And you're like, okay, but like, this is an individual with a human mind and everything like that. And they're like, well, yeah, but like also like and they just like repeat the circular argument. They're like, well, like I have the authority over the household, and therefore that's the end of the conversation. It's like that's what this guy's doing with the fucking money and balance argument.
Yeah, like just asserting what is as if that's what always will be.
Right, and also like what isn't always what is. It could be just a fucking ruse.
Yeah,
it could be that and this is what fucking people do in finance, in accounting, in economics, and in many other fields and industries. Publish a spurious report that doesn't really reflect what's going on.
Yeah.
If you fucking believe the report and you don't investigate what's really going on, then like the shit that comes to you is on you.
Yeah.
Right? And like, it's hard for all of us to get together or do this separately and just like investigate what's really going on. But when there's people living and dying in the streets, and there's people getting blown up in other countries and in our own countries, and fucking schools getting shot up, right? And the military's not doing fucking shit all about saving anybody, right? That to me is fucking evidence, right? Like, the balance sheet is an expression of a myth, and you're buying into the myth like an idiot.
Yeah. And I guess the other thing is, like, if we accept, okay, sure, like, the government is actually collecting taxes and then basing their budget on that and spending it, like, okay, so where does the deficit come from?
Right, yeah.
Does it come from, like, being lent money? So who's lending us the money? Is it the Federal Reserve? Because the Federal Reserve is an organ of the state. So we can just, like, do whatever we want with it, essentially.
Yeah, pretty much, exactly.
You could just say, all of the debt doesn't matter anymore.
Right, yeah.
Write that into law.
You could literally do that.
Or we could do what now canceled former Congressman Gerald Connolly proposed. He actually submitted a bill for this, which is create a new currency called U.S. money that is issued directly by the Treasury, and Federal Reserve notes are invalid now.
Right.
He actually proposed that like 4 years ago.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I mean,
which I saw that and I was like, damn, this guy's awesome. And then like maybe 2 months later, that whole thing came out. Like, I think he like raped someone or sexually assaulted some people or something like that. But anyway, yeah. So yeah, that's the critical article. So there was several responses from MMT people. So I'm going to start and put them in any particular order. So I'm going to start with MMT is already helping. This is Pavlina Cherneva's response. And she does not take the OP remotely seriously. She sort of addresses some things. She characterizes a lot of the article as being guilt by association, which I don't think is like totally true. I guess it kind of is. He's like saying like these are their influences and they have like these right-wing tendencies, and some of the major thinkers in MMT have some weird right-wing opinions and this and that. yeah, a lot of the article attacks their inability to contend with important fronts of attack on the MMT project, like Randall Ray's supposedly poor explanation of Weimar Germany, or the lack of a real theory of inflation, which like Henwood does not propose a better theory of inflation, so not really a good argument. Right. But like rather than like decrying that as guilt by association, why don't you just say like they may have supported those things, but I don't. That's like a really weird thing to me. I never understood like crying about guilt by association. Like, I mean, sometimes I guess it, like for like Louis Farrakhan, right? Like I totally see that, right? But if it's like, oh yeah, you're influenced by this guy who thinks that like welfare is bad, it's like, well, I think welfare is good,
right? So
end of argument.
Right.
But anyway, there is one good counterpoint to a decent point in Henwood's article, which I'll read here. She says, Henwood wants to wage class struggle via fiscal policy and specifically tax policy. Worse, he wants to expropriate the wealth of the rich by making it more digestible for them. He says that rich people would have a lot harder time complaining about their money being taken to educate kids and save the planet than if it were taken because they were too rich. Which, yeah, okay, I can see that. Sure,
right.
Yeah, make them explain why they don't want to give up their money to fund schools and fight climate change.
Yeah.
But she says it sounds very much like, sorry to take your money, but we really, really need it. Don't you agree? What a class war. Which is another good point. I can see that too. Yeah. Henwood does not acknowledge that one of the most effective ways of engaging in this struggle is to render the wealthy obsolete, as in, we will stop pretending that we need them to pay for the good of society. In a world with a sovereign currency and modern monetary and fiscal institutions, we never really did, and we sure don't now. And the public needs to know it. That's the MMT message.
I think that's a good message.
Yeah. So I mean, I could see both sides. I think I'm leaning more towards Pavlina. Just do shit. Doesn't matter.
Yeah. I think. Yeah. Just do shit, basically. And see what comes of it, right?
Yeah.
Like people will.
We can take their money when we throw them in jail for all the crimes they did.
Yeah.
How about that?
Yeah. In fact, we can just throw them in jail, and in the same act, yeah, we could. I mean, we could take their money, or we could just erase it. Either way, cool.
Yeah.
Fuck them, basically.
Yep.
Yeah. On that note, let's take a break.
Okay. Yeah. Sure. Yeah.
I think everyone in DC, there's plenty of like little rich fucking kids running around. So
yeah, I don't know like how great my credit score is because I definitely like after my last move, I started getting calls from collectors, and like some of them were like just total bullshit.
Sure,
but it's like it might be on my record, so I don't know.
Yeah, I would say like just like check it.
Yeah,
you can go on like I said, like Credit Karma or something. Yeah, it's like pretty easy to link it up.
I need to make a list of shit I need to do.
Yeah,
so I'm very disorganized. So. Yeah, it's a problem at work too. I'm trying to get better at it.
Yeah.
All right. So we're back. So the next article is by Randall Ray, and it's called "Response to Doug Henwood's Trolling in Jacobin."
Oh, it's a good article title. I like
yeah.
That. Yeah, it's very poetic.
So the first thing that I have here is Ray clarifies his view on Weimar Germany. So he says. Henwood adopts the monetarist explanation that too much money causes inflation. He confuses causation and correlation. Severe supply constraints can push up prices, increasing the amount of money that needs to be created both publicly and privately to finance purchases. Tax revenues fall behind spending, so a deficit opens up as spending tries to keep pace with inflation. The money stock is a residual, and it will grow rapidly with hyperinflation. That does not mean it is the cause. Bill Mitchell, who's international, he's a non-American MMT person, has closely examined the hyperinflation cases from the MMT perspective. The argument is not at all odd, and it has the advantage that it is fact-based, unlike Henwood's monetarist linking of money and inflation that has been so thoroughly discredited that even central bankers have dropped it. And there's an article I'll link in the show description. The title is "Rapid Increases in Money Supply Do Not Lead to Inflation." It's from
another gripping title.
Yeah. It's from Institute for New Economic Thinking, and they basically did a study of like every case of rapid spending or inflationary episodes. I can't remember; it's one or the other. But basically, they found that most of the time, inflation and government spending, or rapid increases in money supply, or balance sheets, or interest rates, don't correlate with inflation.
Right.
So there's no real case for government spending causing inflation.
Right.
So continuing with Ray's article, I think his response to countries being forced to take on loans and unable to buy anything they want in their own currency is lacking. He says, Henwood does not understand foreign exchange markets. Anyone, including Henwood, can exchange Turkish lira for either dollars or euros in foreign exchange markets, including at airport counters around the world. Turkey can exchange lira for dollars to pay for imports of capital. Might that affect exchange rates? Possibly. That is why floating the currency is important. He doesn't really explain why floating the currency addresses the problem, nor does he contend with the fact that someone has to buy your currency for you to be able to sell it.
Right.
This is like that H-Bomber Guy video that's been going around. Do you know what I'm talking about?
So let's say, for the sake of argument, that all of the water levels around the world rise by let's say 5 feet over the next 100 years, say 10 feet by the next 100 years, and it puts all the low-lying areas on the coast underwater, right? Which, let's say all of that happens. You think that people aren't going to just sell their homes and move?
Just one small problem. Sell their houses to who, Ben? Fucking Aquaman!
It's an excellent question.
Yes. All right. So that's all I pulled out from Ray's article. The next one is just called Modern Monetary Theory, parentheses MMT.
Right.
So this is like the rookie all-star response. So it has all the young bloods of MMT co-authoring this, featuring Nathan Tankus, Raul Carrillo. God, I'm so bad at pronouncing Spanish. Raul Carrillo.
There you go.
Rohan Gray, Scott Ferguson, and Raul Carrillo.
Nice.
This is what happens when I write notes.
He just waded into it.
Yeah, he really contributed to this shit. So some interesting bits from this. Kalecki contends that popularization of the doctrine of full employment destroys the capitalists' knee-jerk arguments regarding budgetary crisis and inflation. What remains is the power struggle we all agree we must fight. As economist J.W. Mason once wrote, the central bank interest rate policy is meant for, quote, keeping us all insecure and dependent on the goodwill of the owning class. And then later they say, 2 decades earlier, at the end of the Clinton administration, leaders in D.C. panicked that continued federal government surpluses would lead to a dearth of U.S. Treasury bonds for the investor class. So they proposed a solution used by Singapore today, issuing Treasury securities to directly purchase private assets. Although this is hardly a radical policy, it would have been an insufficient response for the United States for reasons MMT illuminates. Because Singapore runs trade surpluses, it can afford to run government budget surpluses and simply adopt alternative policies to serve investors. By contrast, Washington was running trade deficits, so its government surpluses were creating actually unsustainable deficits in the private sector. Now, I don't really understand that well enough to comment much on it, but I think it's interesting.
Yeah. Hopefully some of our listeners are really into deficit talk.
Yes.
I don't fucking care.
And one of Henwood's critiques through his whole article was that MMT people are vague about their actual politics. But here in this article, they're actually very clear. They say, the bottom line is we are not going to dismantle financial capitalism through austerity. Instead, we must deconstruct the private financial markets and institutions bolstered by a complex web of financial assets and liabilities, of owning and owing. Selling Treasury securities is not tantamount to placing the U.S. state in the thrall of the investor class.
Right.
Persistent deficit spending is not a, quote, few steps down the road to Weimar, as Henwood contends. If we truly want to end the wealthy's free lunch, I like that.
Yeah.
The answer is not austerity or, shudder, sound finance. It's euthanizing the rentiers. It's lowering treasury bond interest rates and pursuing a permanent zero interest rate policy. One would expect a Marxist to understand how this policy prescription threatens the status quo.
Yes.
When it comes to the politics of taxation, though, Henwood's position is hardly Marxist at all. A sympathetic reader may have expected a leftist perspective on public finance, distinct from both MMT and the mainstream, but they would be disappointed. Instead, we receive this confession, and they have a quote from Doug Henwood that says, "I'm a sound finance socialist." That's the whole tweet.
Right? Yeah, yeah.
Henwood's antipathy Henwood's antipathy toward deficit spending is not merely at odds with MMT, but also is not merely at odds with MMT, but also most Keynesians and Marxist economists as well. For Henwood, the left's role is to merely argue extra hard for corporations and the wealthy to pay their fair share of taxes. This amounts to a more boisterous version of Hillary Clinton's politics.
Yeah.
Damn, savage.
Right.
Yeah, I have another thing here. In her excellent recent book, Racial Taxation, legal historian Camille Walsh traces the development of taxpayer citizenship in response to the mandated integration of public schools. She specifically argues that the Supreme Court rejected the idea of a fundamental federal right to education precisely because of the countervailing burden it would place on the implicit rights of taxpayers. And so taxpayers obviously just means white people.
Yeah.
And I think in most political discourse, it's a dog whistle for white people.
Yeah.
Same with middle class.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Taxpayers.
Yeah, because the people that pay most of the taxes are white people.
Because of their affluence.
Yeah, and then most of the people in the middle class are white people.
Yep. What's left of the middle class.
Yes.
Yeah.
There was also an article that they have in there that they just linked to, but I want to cover it more later because it's very interesting. I didn't get to read much of it because I was trying to get the rest of this done. But it was by Randall Ray and Alia Semenova, and it's called "The Rise of Money in Class Society." He cited it as a response to the charge that MMTers have not investigated the relation between MMT and class society. And it basically contains much of the same narrative as what I've thought for the last year or so, which is basically that currency and religion both arose to create or at least maintain and expand class society. And they take it all the way back to the ancient world.
I would love to read that.
Yeah.
For that reason.
Yeah. So I have it linked in the show notes.
Yeah.
In the show notes. So if you're interested, check it out.
Yeah.
So that's all I really pulled from that article. So I have some questions that I wrote for us to answer. The first one is just the basic MMT, one of the basic MMT assertions, which is, can governments always pay debts issued in their own currency? So I think yes, they can. Mainstream economists think that something bad will happen if countries attempt to do this, either the first time they try or after subsequent times. I think they interpret this question in their head as, can the government issue infinity dollars and pay back infinity plus 10% dollars under any circumstance? But let's flip it around. Why would anyone give the government money on the promise of repayment if it weren't guaranteed to get it back?
Right.
The only way that could happen is if the state failed.
Exactly. That's a great way to put it.
Yeah. So, like, if the government issues debt, they will always be able to pay back that debt because all they have to do is issue dollars to pay it back.
Right.
And you could argue, and mainstream economists do argue this, that sure they could do that, but if they try to sell bonds after that, then people are going to be less willing to take them because they just created false money or whatever, fictitious money, whatever the fuck you want to call it, to pay back the bonds. Yep. And so it'll make it less desirable, but I don't think there's really any good reason to believe that, other than supply and demand.
Right. Well, so this is this is another interesting aspect of how like international relations, like political theories, like tend, if not always, succeed or tend very strongly. But like, at least what I learned is like they tend to be a little more realistic about the facts of things like state power.
Sorry,
that's all right. You just gotta have it, just gotta take that hit. In this case, so you say, why would anyone give the government money on the promise of repayment if it weren't guaranteed to get it back? And the only way that could happen is if the state failed. That applies to interstate relations as well, international relations, right? And this is how we see like debt colonialism, or whatever the term properly is in academia.
Yeah.
But basically the transformation of traditional colonial bonds through like military occupation and administration through to like financial obligation and stuff like that. That's how this works, is that and this fleshes out there's a feedback analysis, like if you kind of bounce from one paradigm to another, then you start to be able to understand that this is like the businesses and government are not that different.
Yeah.
Right. So you're like, why would any business say give the government money if they weren't guaranteed to get that money back? Right. The state is required for that to work.
Yeah.
Right. So then you think, well, okay, then you think about state to state, right? They're like, we'll give you all this American money so that you can rebuild Somalia, quote unquote, right? Or Thailand, or whatever the fuck it is, right? And then those countries are held as debtors to the power that lent them that money. And as we've basically explained in this episode and touched on in other episodes, the money is backed by force.
Yes.
So, of course, the U.S. pours money into defense spending because they want to be able to fucking obliterate anybody that challenges their financial hegemony, right? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So then you say, okay, well, if that's how states treat each other, then you say, well, then who's beholden to whom in the domestic situation?
Right.
Right? Who, like, is the government, quote unquote, the bureaus of the government and the organs of the state, if they're obligated to give money back to businesses in some sense, then like who's in power there?
Yes.
Right. And you have to like really reach into that level of just relational kind of analysis, like networks and stuff, and like just look at it sheerly in terms of obligation and ability to enforce. Ability to pay doesn't fucking matter. They will turn your kids into slaves like that.
Yes.
Right? Ability to enforce is all that matters. Right? And that's why we have nukes. That's why we have subs. That's why we have fucking, air supremacy and everything, and satellites and shit. So,
yeah, and then the other thing is like, okay, so they buy these bonds and then you just issue new currency to pay them the bonds. Like, why would they give a shit? Because they have the money. They want the money so that they can like get stuff for it. So if they can still get stuff for it, then who gives a shit where the money came from? It doesn't matter.
Exactly. And this is also one reason, like, speaking of that, just a quick aside, that's one reason why like businesses are so often willing to like discount this or pay more for that. They just want the shit.
Yes.
Or the ability to force labor to mobilize.
Right.
That's all they care about.
Yeah.
The price, as long as they're sort of in control of the price and they're not budgeting that much, they'll totally fucking do it. You know? And I've been in offices where like I overhear like the director of finance saying, "Pay him next week."
Yeah.
They're like, "Oh, it's due now. Pay him next week." Like they don't give a fuck. They just want to like they'll pay the overdraft or whatever it is because they're expecting some other money to come in or some other shit like that, right?
Yes.
Like they're fine.
Yeah.
It's
all about flows.
It's all about flows.
Yeah.
And again, ability to enforce.
Yeah.
It's like if they're in a particular position in the quote unquote market, which is the web of obligations, right? Then they'll be happy to delay payment, which is why restaurants and other businesses don't pay their workers so often, right? They don't give a fuck about you,
right?
And they'll try to keep that money if they.
And what are you gonna do if they don't?
What are you gonna do? Yeah. Exactly. You don't have a fucking army.
Take them to small claims court.
Yeah,
Most people are afraid as hell to do that shit.
Yeah.
So. So the next one is it bad for Warren Mosler to be running a hedge fund and evading taxes? So I don't really think that it is. I've talked about my views on business being useful to get to the levers of power of the state and using those levers to help the working class or to aid in the construction of a dual power project. So if you just have a problem with him running a hedge fund, then say that and give a reason. If his hedge fund is helping Cargill-starved Venezuelans, then that's bad, and we should talk about it. And that's the reason that it's bad.
Yeah.
But if he's just like taking money from other rich people, like who gives a fuck?
Yeah,
exactly. That's already happening.
Yeah,
it's not like it's happening because of Warren Mosler.
Right. It's like the financialized version of like a union or even like a fucking terrorist cell, for that matter. Like just like I don't know. Not to be all creepy about terrorism, but like
and then. So if we've gotten to the point of even talking about the taxes, if we accept like, okay, it's fine that he's running the hedge fund, but it's bad that he's putting his money in a tax shelter or whatever, then if you think about it, accepting the premises of MMT, like if you think about it from his perspective where he's the MMT guy, so he's fully on board with this idea that taxes do not fund spending.
Right.
The government creates money. It doesn't really matter like how much tax revenue is going in. Then why would you handicap yourself in pushing your movement forward by voluntarily giving more money to the government that can create it freely? And even if you don't accept those premises, then surely you're not dumb enough to think that the government is actually doing anything good with the money it collects. Like, oh, so Warren Mosler should like hand over more of his money so that they can go do another Iraq?
Right.
Like, what the fuck? The argument that anyone should just pay their taxes because it's the right thing to do is really a lot like, if you think socialism is the answer, then give all your money away.
Right. Yeah, I mean, here's kind of how I see, like, just riffing on this Warren Mosler example.
Yeah.
And what we've talked about before, like, create a leftist business, this is where we need to consider that, like, seizure of the, like, power of the state from, like, a Marxist-Leninist position, needs to countenance seizing financial power, which means that you need to create or take over an existing financial organization.
Yeah.
And do that shit because it's the financial industry is like the other side of state power from the military. It's literally like it's killing people and then it's making them owe things, basically, right?
Yep.
So, and so people prefer one thing over the other because they're like, well, I don't want to die. I don't want my people to die. I don't want to get tortured to death, whatever the fuck. So they'll just be like, I'd rather have debt, right? If you can take over the debt side, right? There's.
I would rather die. I'd rather be killed. I'd rather my friends die.
Yeah,
I don't want that debt.
I don't want that debt. Right. But basically, like it's like if you want to take over, parts of the military.
That's like the Christian
you
thing.
might as well take over. Yeah, exactly. Right? Yeah. No, I can't do that.
I need to be debt free.
I need to be right. Raise your hand and start like singing a hymn or something. Yeah, it's like if you're serious about taking over the organs of the state, you have to like figure out. I encourage you, my Leninist and Maoist friends, I encourage you strongly to figure out ways to fucking infiltrate the finance industry.
Yeah,
and fuck them up,
or just business in general.
Yeah,
like
just business in general. Right.
Because like if we want to bring up Venezuela,
again, if they're lying to us, we can lie to them.
Yeah. If we want to bring up Venezuela as Henwood did in the worst possible way, let's bring up Venezuela. So Venezuela's inflation is caused by mostly foreign businesses who have control of their industry.
Yep.
And so like if we want to take over the state and start doing like large government spending projects, you either have to like nationalize all the companies, which is it's a whole other thing, or take them over a different way through doing business yourself.
Yep.
And I mean, I don't want to rehash the whole thing, but like, in order to get a movement that's capable of taking state power, like you're going to need funding somehow.
Right.
Is everyone going to do it from their fucking Starbucks, Applebee's wages? their Amazon warehouse wages?
Right.
To fund the entire communist revolution? Like, come on, man.
Exactly. And
no one's trying to rehash illegalism, as far as I know.
Right.
You know?
Maybe me. I don't know.
Libertarians.
Maybe, yeah, exactly. Maybe the one guy who Robin Hood, like you mentioned.
Robin Banks, yeah.
Robin Banks, sorry. Robin Banks, the guy.
Yeah, that guy kicks ass.
That's like the one illegalist that I know of who's like contemporary to us,
contemporary left illegalist, because there's plenty of those agorist guys that are like, black markets are actually anti-state. No, not really. Right. But okay. Right. Go ahead and do crimes. We're not going to fight you on that.
I guess. Well,
preferably don't do it with Bitcoin, because you're toasting the earth.
Right. Seriously. Well, that's funny, because like that difference is, as I understand it, that's like the chimera or like the fork in the historical road that led to the development of like unions on the left and like mafia on the right.
Yeah.
And when the unions were just like crushed or like battered at least, and pushed out and co-opted, then like it was the mafia that flourished, because the mafia is an inherently right-wing, fucked up, dickish,
extremely authoritarian
organization.
Violent,
exactly. Yeah. There are like many death pyramids. There are many states, just like any business. They just exist in that kind of black market. Oh, this is good, and and you're like, no, you're murdering and raping people a lot.
Hey, I'm doing agorism over here.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, it's just agorism is just like soft mafia shit. It's just like individualist mafia.
I got an investment opportunity for you. You ever heard of Bitcoin?
You ever heard of Silk Road? You can smuggle your drugs and your hookers and carry guns along the way. Make a lot of money. You can walk your dogs on the side.
I think we really need to get on this dark web thing.
Right. The new Italian dark web.
Hey, Joey Bag of Donuts. You know how to get on the fucking dark web?
Right. And meanwhile, leftists are like, I'm too pure to accept a raise at like the fucking shoe store or whatever. Like I'm better than that somehow.
Yeah.
Or like I just I smoked weed the other day while I was filling out the job application, and the cops got me. And fuck it.
All right, so the last question, I think. No, second to last question that I have here is, are the beliefs of MMT people secretive and sinister? So, I mean, we partially answered that in the negative already with that article from the Rookies. Mm-hmm. But I actually like read that part after all this whole answer, so this is not really going to include that. But I said I think some of their beliefs are vague, but I think that's also very common in academia. Yeah. So I found a line in that Rise of Money in Class Society article that I immediately mocked in our group DM, which is, while we do not argue that perfect equality is possible or even desirable in developed industrialized societies, parentheses, for reasons that are beyond the scope of this chapter, end parentheses, we do contend that the current state of income inequality could and should be remedied via the use of modern monetary theory for the public purpose, blah, 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 blah. So they state a belief, but then they avoid giving any reasoning for it, even implicitly, and insist that it's beyond the scope of discussion. But I don't think that your reasoning for not arguing something like that is so beyond the scope of what you're talking about that you can't even offer like the merest summary or citation of why.
Right.
Like that's exactly what footnotes are for.
That's lazy writing, honestly. Like, you could do better. Like you said, footnotes, you just put it in the fucking footnotes, yeah.
Yeah. And then, of course, there is the phrase current state of income inequality, which is a simultaneously extremely restrictive and extremely permissive statement. So, like, income inequality implicitly excludes all other forms of social inequality. And then current state of offers an arbitrary point at which some income inequality is okay, which could be anywhere between no one should make more than 1% above what anyone else makes, and Jeff Bezos makes the median Amazon salary every 9 seconds, but he should really only make the median Amazon salary every 10 seconds.
Right. Again, it's all constructed, so just pick a fucking team.
Yeah, just fucking explain it, man. Like, all you have to do is be like, oh, well, I think that some inequality is good because it incentivizes innovation. There's like a million reasons. We've all heard them before, so it's not like
we're going to be like, oh, wow, that's a totally insane thing for you to think. It's like, just say it so that we can tell you that you're fucking wrong and stupid and explain why.
Commit to being wrong.
Yes.
Please. I beg you.
And I have seen quotes around supposedly from various MMT people saying that they're opposed to welfare and money for free and shit like that. I don't know where those quotes are from I don't know when those quotes are from. And I think that all of these people have been working in obscurity for a long time and may have like changed their beliefs recently. Like most people have on the left. Like I would say the majority of the current left probably was not very left wing prior to 2016.
Oh yeah, no, I was still figuring my shit out.
Yeah.
You know?
I've had perfect opinions forever, personally.
Well, right, you know.
But not everyone has.
And you're going to be involved in the glass pyramid for the rest of eternity.
Yeah, exactly.
So, you know, congrats.
As soon as I start thinking anything reactionary, just fucking
just hose you.
Bury me in sand and then torch it with a flamethrower.
We got
him. So, yeah, I guess, like, I mean, some of their beliefs are vague. I think that applies to most people.
Yeah.
A lot of people will not give you straightforward answers on certain questions, or they just don't even know.
Just come from
eggs.
That seems rather restrictive. What I don't know. Would they just fall out of butterflies?
I mean, my opinion is that everything comes from eggs. So
houses.
Yeah, metal,
money, metal. Yeah, right.
The universe.
Yeah, right.
All came out of eggs. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm a turtles all the way down guy, but it's turtle eggs.
Oh yeah. Turtle eggs are weird. They're very soft. They're like
okay.
They're like they feel kind of like melted ping pong balls that are like very flexible. That's the shell.
Okay.
Like almost like a rubber ball, but like you can like just kind of like flex it a little bit.
Yeah.
And then like the yolk or whatever inside is like super liquidy. But like you can boil those too. Not to like horrify our like vegan friends, but like
please do not boil turtle eggs.
Sorry, yeah, don't fuck up the turtle eggs. It's just that like I was a tiny child and the locals made some turtle eggs and fed them to me.
That's fine.
And I was like, oh, okay. And I didn't know they were fucking endangered at the time.
Some people
were
eat cats,
everywhere.
you know. I'm not gonna tell them they can't,
right?
Because they can. I can't stop them.
Yeah.
So the last question I have, is it legal for the Fed to buy treasury bonds? If not, why not? So I guess I already answered this, which is the Federal Reserve Act specifies that the Federal Reserve may buy and sell treasury securities only in the open market. Conducting transactions in the open market rather than directly with the Treasury. This is a quote from the Federal Reserve itself. So they say conducting transactions in the open market rather than directly with the Treasury supports the independence of the central bank in the conduct of monetary policy. So they're basically saying that they don't want to be able to be compelled by the Treasury to buy Treasury bonds so that the Treasury can spend a bunch of money on whatever, ruining fiscal policy somehow. I guess. This is still an area that I'm working on understanding, so
yeah.
Yeah.
The Fed is fucking dumb.
Yeah.
It's just dumb. I mean, yeah, the Fed is basically just like the American Bank of England. It's like,
yes,
they're like, oh, it's not part of the government. We've talked about this before. You're like, it's a fucking organ in the state. It doesn't have to be formally part of the government, right? Like, if it looks like a duck and quacks like a fucking duck,
yeah,
it's the Bank of England with a hat on, you know, like with a fucking cowboy hat on, you know, like, come on.
It's the Bank of England drinking a milkshake.
Yeah, exactly. God damn
it. And that duck is racist, actually. So
very, very deeply racist.
So we should take his milkshake and throw it at him.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Full circle.
Wow, what
folks.
a full metaphor we have
circle.
here.
Yes.
Let's see. Any other thoughts on MMT or the Fed? I think it's very weird, the Fed conspiracy theory thing by libertarians. I never really understood that.
Well, most of the things they say are not really to be understood.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, they also have, like, their understanding of economics is thoroughly rooted in neoclassical and Austrian theory, which just literally inverts everything.
Yeah.
Gets
every single possible thing wrong.
It's amazing.
Except
actually.
Austrians do actually have a correct definition of capital, which is surprising, but that's about it.
Yeah.
I have been watching a lot of anime this week.
Good.
I watched the first 9 episodes of Demon Slayer Kimetsu no Yaima. I think I might be getting that wrong, but yeah, it's like I think it's supposed to be a shonen anime, but it seems like seinen to me because it's not. It doesn't have like the usual like
and it's like
goofy, like
weird.
shouty kind of stuff. There's no like it's not very horny at all, which is like very much a hallmark of shonen anime, I think.
Yeah.
But it's basically oh, actually, this is a really great thing to talk about because I learned some really interesting history around this. So it takes place during I can't remember what it's called, but it's between the Meiji Restoration and the Shouwa period, which is when Hirohito was emperor and they were the Japanese Empire and doing World War II shit. So it's basically like 1900, like 1896 to like 1918, I think is this period.
Gotcha.
Or 1927. So I found out. Okay, so first of all, the show is really good. I highly recommend it. The animation is great. The music is great. It's like a really cool atmosphere. It's basically about, I mentioned it in the intro actually, it's about a kid whose family was slain by demons, except for his sister, who becomes a demon. And there's a demon slayer in the area who's like right about to kill his sister. And the main character is like begging him not to do it. And
he said supply and demand or something.
And the sister, it turns out, is not like other demons.
Okay.
She does not, because like all the other demons just like eat people. They're basically ghouls. They just eat people. And so she does not eat the brother. She actually turns around and defends him from the demon slayer. So the demon slayer decides not to kill the sister.
She's legit.
And the brother like almost like kicks his ass, like he's running, he's about to run past this tree, and he's been throwing rocks at the guy because all he has is a hatchet, and the demon slayer's like this fucking swords play expert.
Right.
So he's like throwing rocks at him, and he goes past this tree, and then the brother's like running towards him, and he's got both his hands behind his back. And the demon slayer thinks he's about to like swing his hatchet at him, and he just like dodges and like whacks him with the hilt of his sword and knocks him unconscious. And then he barely dodges his hatchet flies right past his head. He had thrown it at the same time he threw the rock, but he like did it in a hidden way, so it's like going way up into the air. And right as he was like about to hit the guy, it's like it was gonna nail him in the head, but. He noticed, like, he looked down, he's like, where's that guy's hatchet? And then he's like, oh shit.
Fuck.
So he, like, sends the brother to be, like, trained as a demon slayer. And so that's what the show is.
Cool.
Very cool.
So like a fun little adventure.
Yeah.
Nice.
But I was curious about this period, because they mentioned the name of it in the show. And so I was like, oh, I wonder what was happening during this period. And there's all kinds of crazy shit. So this is when there's a Japanese anarchist named I can't remember his first name, but his last name is Shusui. And he translated a bunch of Kropotkin's works, and I think some of Marx's works as well. And he was involved in an incident. He and his partner, who is a Japanese feminist, they were both executed because of this incident. They nearly killed then Prince Regent and future Emperor Hirohito. So they possibly could have prevented like the Japanese Empire shit from happening. They were not successful, obviously, and they were executed for that.
Yeah. The Japanese anarchists got fucking just destroyed.
Yeah,
man. Like,
and the communists as well.
Yeah, yes.
Because as a result of this incident, and also because of an earlier incident, which they were both also involved in. It's called the Red Flag Incident. It was basically some political dissidents were released from prison. And all of their political comrades were waiting for them outside the prison. And so they get out, and they're like cheering and they're waving red flags around, and they're saying like revolution, and like shit like that.
Yeah.
And a bunch of them were arrested, and then they created this police force called the Toko, which is short for the really fucking long thing that I don't have written down here, and I'm not going to try and pronounce.
Yeah.
But it's basically a police force meant specifically to crush hostile ideologies to the state.
Right, of course.
Which basically means communists.
Yep.
And after the high treason incident, which is where they attempted to kill Hirohito, they created another, like a new division for it, which was called the Thought Police, pejoratively by Japanese.
Yep.
And it was like specifically made to like infiltrate communist groups. And they also passed these laws. I can't remember what they're called. It's like the Peace Accords or something like that. And it basically made it was like a blanket law against any dissident ideology.
Yeah.
It was anything that aims to destroy the institution of private property or threatens. It's a Japanese term which basically means like the order of the state. So it's like it would be as if like as if in the U.S. they said like anything that threatens like the American government or something like that, which that could just mean fucking anything,
like the Patriot Act
or like American politics.
Yeah.
It was just super vague. So they actually they investigated something like 50,000 people, or no, sorry, they arrested 50,000 people, tried around 5,000, and around half of those were actually imprisoned.
Yeah.
And in prison, they were forced to write essays for these officials over and over, saying like explaining how they've changed. And how they don't support those ideologies anymore, and they had to keep writing them until the officials were satisfied that they were actually they had the 2 + 2 = 5 shit.
Yep, it's fucked up.
Yeah.
Luckily, nothing like that has ever happened in the United States of America.
No.
Yeah,
it's good over here.
Yeah, it's good. It's pretty good place to live.
Yeah.
So
pretty interesting stuff, I think.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Yeah, I'll have to look into
the show does seem to have things to say about masculinity. Really? Not necessarily very good things.
Well, I mean,
like one line I remember was like this character was telling the brother to like basically stop whining, and if you're a man, then you should suffer in silence until you like overcome whatever it is.
Oh right, yeah.
Blah blah blah. Which is like, oh, okay. I don't know if that's
suffering in silence.
Really true. I think you can tell people that you're suffering.
Yeah.
I think that's okay.
Yeah. As good communists and anarchists, we have to, be vocal about our suffering.
Yeah. I guess one thing about it is, and another reason it's not really a shonen anime is because unlike, 99% of shonen anime, the main character doesn't depend on like having friends to overcome the enemy. It's like he just trained really, really hard and learned these like Demon Slayer like forms and techniques and stuff, and that's his power.
Okay.
But there's also they don't have that power scaling thing where it's like, I have this secret power now that you never knew about, now I have a spirit bomb and I'm gonna get the whole universe's life energy and all that kind of shit.
Right.
Another thing that's cool is like the two main tools that the Demon Slayers use besides their sword is their sense of smell and like breathing techniques. So it's like almost like qigong type of stuff.
Yeah.
Like the brother, the main character guy, he's like able to find openings in his opponents by using this like it's basically magic, but it's like he smells. There's like this scent trail coming off of him that's like a wire, and then when it becomes taut, that's like when there's an opening. So like as soon as this wire goes from like his nose to their forehead, he slashes and they're like fucking dead.
I fucking love that.
It's cool. And then he has like this total concentration breathing technique, which is like it basically makes their blood circulate so fast that it like turns their muscles into overdrive and like gets them a lot of oxygen and shit.
Okay. Yeah,
like
that's very qigong.
Very Asian type of thing,
Yeah, I love that.
Pretty cool.
It's like simultaneously like hilarious and kind of like alluring. You're just like, oh yeah, totally, yeah.
Yeah.
Like just breathe until they freak out. Like, what? No. What?
Yeah. I also started watching. I was watching it right before I came over here. I'm like super excited to continue on with it. I was surprised because I thought it would be like, this is kind of good.
Yeah.
But I'm like super into it now. It's called Kono Oto Tomare. And it's about this club at a. I still don't know if it's a middle school or a high school. I missed when they said it was, but it's a school club for a Japanese instrument called the koto.
Yep.
It's like a traditional Japanese instrument, very big. It's actually there's a Chinese instrument that's similar to it called the qingong. I'm probably saying the tones wrong, but it's basically like this big, giant, like wooden stringed instrument. There's 10 strings. Yep. Some of them have 17 strings. It's got like movable frets on it.
Yep.
And you play it with finger picks.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, I mean, this is kind of spoilers, but basically it's only the first episode. So, like, basically, like, the members that were in the club, all except for the main character, they all graduate. So it's just the main character left in the Koto club. And so he has to find new people to fill up the club so that it doesn't get disbanded. And the first person that tries to join the club is this transfer student who's like a notorious delinquent who had this incident with the police the year before where like he was living with his grandpa and he supposedly smashed up his grandfather's shop who was also a koto maker. So he made koto. So he smashed up the shop, and then a few days later his grandfather died, supposedly because of that. And so he was arrested by the police, and so he now has this reputation for being like a terribly violent person who like killed his grandfather. So he's the first person that tries to join the Koto club, and the main character's like fuck you, like what are you talking about? Like, what are you planning? Like, you don't want to join this club. Like, this club's for fucking nerds. Like, everyone thinks that we're nerds. No one respects us at all. Like, I don't get why you would want to join this club. So fuck off.
Right.
And he finds out. Like, he talks to the principal, and the principal's like, "Well, I really hope this club continues because it was actually started by a friend of mine."
Okay.
And he comes to find out that what actually happened was the delinquent kid was like basically in a gang with these other kids, and he's started learning koto from his grandfather, and so he stopped hanging out with the gang kids, and they came and smashed up his grandfather's shop to like fuck with him.
Okay.
And his grandfather was just sickly and happened to die a couple days later. And his grandfather was actually the one who started the club, and that's why he wants to join it.
Oh wow, damn. That's deep.
It's very cool.
That fucking hits.
Yeah. And then the next episode we meet someone who's like a prodigy, like really, really, really good koto player who she joins the club. Right. And yeah, that's where I'm at now.
Nice. That sounds like a fun series to watch.
It's really good.
Not like as bloody and shouty and like
it is
horrible.
Like there are surprisingly like bloody scenes.
Oh really?
Yeah, because they show like the delinquent kid's past, which is very violent.
Sure. Okay, yeah. So like social stuff.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah, and there's other delinquents that are like trying to fuck with him, and they get into fights and shit like that. But it's mostly like slice of life sort of thing.
Cool.
And it seems like, I mean, I don't know the themes based off of 2 episodes, obviously, but it seems like it's going to go really in on, like, personal improvement and, like, helping one another, like, get past you, like realize your weaknesses and work past them and stuff like that. And, like, learning to trust people even if, you know, they seem untrustworthy on the outside or, like, someone that you shouldn't associate with.
Right.
And, like, learning not to judge people too quickly.
Yeah.
Seems very wholesome.
Yeah. I was gonna say that's like really wholesome.
Yeah.
That's cool.
And some of the music so far is very beautiful, like stuff that you wouldn't hear anywhere else.
Right.
You know?
Like traditional Japanese.
Yeah.
I assume.
Yeah.
Nice.
There's another show that has some traditional Japanese art that I want to I have to finish watching it still, but I want to talk about it in a later episode. It's called Shouwa no Rakugo Tenso or something like that.
Okay.
And it's about this not ancient but old Japanese theater art called Rakugo. I think it was popular in the 19th century. Mm-hmm. And it's basically stand-up comedy before stand-up comedy existed.
Huh.
So it's just a person kneeling on a stage, and they're telling stories and playing different characters all by themselves. They don't really move much. They just like take on different like mannerisms and ways of speaking
and stuff.
Yeah, and they just tell jokes, and it's about this guy who's like getting into Rakugo, who's also like kind of, I don't know if he's I don't remember if he's like a delinquent, but I think he's just like kind of a slacker basically. But he turns out to be really good at it, and it's actually very funny. Like, there's obviously going to be a lot of humor that we won't get because it's going to be very cultural, like all humor is. Mm-hmm. But like, the Rakugo performances are laugh out loud funny, and it's a fun show to watch. But I think I'm only on episode like 5 or 6. So.
Okay, is it Shouwa Genroku Rakugo Shinjuu?
Yes, that's it.
Okay,
yeah. Man, I really fucked that title up.
It's
it's hard to remember.
I don't even know these terms.
Yeah,
so, like, it's been a while. So
yeah, and it has 2 seasons. I think there's like a sequel called like Descending Stories.
Oh, okay.
That
the thing I just pulled up. Yeah. Nice. That sounds really interesting and fun. That's cool.
Yeah.
That's cool.
So cool Asian culture stuff that you won't really see anywhere else.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's cool. Awesome.
So I guess that'll about do it for us.
Yeah. Good discussion.
Yeah.
We basically
very
solved
snappy.
the whole capitalism.
Yeah.
Congrats.
It's nice having like organized notes and shit, and like me not just spending like 40 hours a week gaming. Yeah. So if you enjoyed that, check out our other episodes. We did one with Shannon Strucci Movies on YouTube.
Yep.
About parasocial interaction and the top grossing YouTubers. That
was a fun one.
Yeah. Who, YouTubers are in the news again because of the whole drama with, I can't remember, it's Carlos something from Vox and Steven Crowder, who has been homophobically harassing him for years and has just been demonetized as of today. And so now all of the definitely not Nazi gamers are standing up for free speech once again when it's truly important.
Good old free speech.
They were completely ignoring it for the last few months when Chelsea Manning was in prison, but YouTubers being taken down for being like white nationalists and shit. That's super important.
Unacceptable.
Yeah. Like I saw this thread that someone posted that was like, here's like all these accounts that have been demonetized lately, which of course, like, they have no evidence that this is part of the same fucking reaction. It's just like, so you're just like listing things that have happened at the same time. That doesn't mean it's part of this whole thing.
Right.
But like, I clicked on a bunch of them and it's like people defending saying the N-word like in their, like at the top of their timeline and shit like that. And it's like one of them was like literally, 2013 was great because, you could say the N-word and people wouldn't get mad at you. It's like,
oh my fucking God.
Cool.
That's just oh my God. That's just like fucking 4chan shit. Like, these people are fucking poisoned.
Yeah. I say this all the time, but their politics ultimately come down to girls having blue hair, not being able to say the N-word, and why doesn't anyone like me?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, exactly. You're like, well, it's a short list.
So our website is post-scarcity. Our website is neighborsciencepodcast.com. I also have postscarcitymagazine.com. Although I don't even know if it's up anymore. I haven't checked it in a long ass time. Our Twitter is at neighborsidepod. I'm at handle of rye. Chris is at solidarity_goth.
Yep.
We never even introed ourselves.
That's fine.
I'm Ryan.
I'm Chris.
Yep.
Nobody gives a shit. You don't listen to this. Nobody's listening to this. We're just speaking in the dark.
We are literally speaking in the dark right now, but you know.
My light bulb's burned out. It's great. It's fucking great.
It's a great thing about living with roommates. Is like a light bulb goes out, and it's like, well, I don't want to change that. Someone else will.
It's just like, fuck it.
What do we? How are we going to split a light bulb 3 ways?
Right. If this is a just world, I would be owed carbon credits.
All right. Bye.
Bye.